Hi, I'm Joshua McNichols, host of KUOW's podcast, Booming. Join me and the Big Dig podcast for a conversation about the decisions shaping our highways, from removing the Alaskan Way Viaduct to the future of I-5 and Highway 99. That's Monday, October 27th at 7 p.m. at the Central Library in downtown Seattle. RSVP for this free event at kuow.org/events. See you there.
KUOW live events are sponsored by Finney Ridge Painting.
On the latest Sound Politics, Jimmy Kimmel is back on air, but not in Seattle. And the reason why highlights a consolidating media landscape that impacts what you see on TV. It's a lot bigger than Jimmy. We'll break down the mergers that are taking place and how those companies are trying to gain favor with federal regulators with an expert from WSU. That's Sound Politics wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Monica.
Hey, Joshua.
I see that you're in your closet.
I am. When we have to bring you an emergency last-minute bonus booming episode, we make it work. We are bringing a story we didn't expect to be reporting today, which is that the FTC and Amazon settled this landmark case that was unfolding in Seattle. The trial only lasted a couple of days. You and I were both in the courtroom, and we wanted to let our listeners know what the heck happened.
Yeah. We gained some insights from being in there that might explain a little bit why this happened. Okay, so Monica, let's just start with what was the settlement between Amazon and the FTC?
Yeah, this was a very surprising start to my day yesterday. I think before 9 a.m., this and 3 other major stories on the economic beat broke. But this one absorbed my attention because the FTC announced it had reached one of the largest consumer redress settlements in its history with Amazon just 2 days after this trial in Seattle started. The total amount of the settlement is $2.5 billion, and $1 billion of that is just going to the government in civil penalties. But the other $1.5 billion is going to go directly to Amazon customers in the form of $51 payments, supposedly to cover the cost of their Prime membership when they were signed up during this period that the government says Amazon broke the law. So this case was unusual in a lot of ways. It was a jury trial. It had already started when this massive settlement was announced. Joshua, you were there during opening arguments. Can you just sort of summarize why the federal government brought this case against Amazon and what they were trying to prove based on what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, in their opening statements, they kind of laid out these 3 main points. They said, number 1, Amazon enrolled millions of people in its Prime subscription service without them knowing. Number 2, Amazon made it hard and confusing for people to cancel Prime. And number 3, Amazon knew what it was doing. It knew it broke a law called the Restore Online Shoppers Confidence Act.
Rosca to its friends.
Which is supposed to make things more transparent online.
And they had kind of a funny phrase to describe what Amazon was up to, right?
Yeah, the phrase they used was stop, drop, and roll. You know, kind of like when you're on fire.
Yeah.
But the idea here is that periodically, Amazon would stop using deceptive pages and make it easier for people to know when they're signing up and cancel. So they would stop using those pages, and then they would see a drop in signups. They would see a drop in their number of Prime enrollments. And so then they would roll back the improvements. So this was basically the FTC's way of saying that Amazon knew, because it was constantly testing results, it knew what it was doing, but it was choosing to go after revenue from Prime signups rather than doing the good thing, which is to make things clearer for customers.
Yeah, this is something that came up during the testimony that I saw on the second day of the trial. Mm-hmm. So this was when the FTC called their key witness. And it was interesting because you and I talked about this beforehand. We weren't quite sure who this witness was going to be more helpful to. His name's Reed Nelson. He's a former user experience researcher who spent a decade at Amazon. So I think we were both expecting that maybe he might forget some details. Maybe he might be sort of helpful to his a reluctant witness. Yeah, helpful to his former employer. But that wasn't really how it went down from my perspective. So the FTC started by asking Nelson questions and asked about this process where Amazon would sort of experiment with making its website clearer and easier to understand. And then they would see a drop of about up 20% or more in signups, and then they would go back to what we referred to in our last episode as dark patterns, which is sort of the way that the website is designed that gets people to do things they weren't planning to do. The testimony did not look great for Amazon, I have to say. The FTC showed a lot of emails and text messages between Nelson and other members of the team trying to flag this very common customer frustration that he kept seeing over and over again. And at the very end of his testimony, there was actually a text message that said something like, Amazon has made some of these changes, but only as a result of FTC scrutiny, and that's what's going to lose this case if it ever goes to trial.
Yeah.
And then the FTC rested their case by asking him, you mentioned that the cancellation process is still really challenging. How do you know that? And he said, well, I had to help my mother-in-law unsubscribe.
Oh, man. Well, it's funny. The whole time I was kind of curious about how this was going to play for a jury, because we had a jury of people, just normal people from Seattle, sitting in this box and listening to these arguments that the FTC was making and that Amazon was making. And I felt like a lot of Amazon's arguments were founded on this sort of outrage that anyone would think Amazon would intentionally deceive their customers. And also this argument that, we're not technically breaking the law. There's no way we could have known that we were breaking the law since the law is vague. They use this analogy where they said, imagine you're driving down the highway and there's a sign that it's a speed limit sign, but it doesn't tell you the exact speed limit. It says speed limit, drive reasonably, And so they're like, how could we ever have known this? And before the trial even started, Amazon's lawyers were trying to get the judge to allow them to show evidence to the jurors that said, this law, it never says exactly what font color your fine print has to be in. It never says what font size it has to be. And the judge didn't allow them to sort of explicitly tie these details to the law. So they were kind of hamstrung in a way as to how technical they could be in their arguments. And I don't feel like they're arguments that would have won over a juror anyway.
Yeah, interestingly, Amazon was the one that insisted on a jury, and I assume that maybe some of the rationale there was that this was going to be a trial in Seattle. There are a lot of folks here who are entrepreneurs or work in tech who sort of understand that everybody does this kind of thing to some extent. We should note that Amazon did not agree to any wrongdoing as part of the settlement, and they still contend that they did not break the law, that they didn't do anything wrong, and that they are a customer-obsessed business, and so it wouldn't make sense for them to deceive their customers. But they said that, settling just allows them to move forward and continue to focus on customers.
Yeah, it does make sense. Part of their argument where they said, angry customers don't shop on Amazon, and Prime signups are not our main source of revenue. We just want happy people because happy people who use our services are more likely to shop, Yeah.
That being said, when Amazon's attorneys cross-examined Nelson, he was giving them a little more friction than he gave the FTC lawyers. So, I don't want to read too much into it because I don't know him and I haven't interviewed him, but I sort of got the impression from him and talking to others in the design community that they flag these issues, that they recognize when the design is creating a pattern and they're seeing a lot of frustration with customers. And in our last episode, when we interviewed Harry Brignall, the designer who talked about how there needs to be more advocacy from this field, he said that designers want to have more of a voice at the table and make sure that they're not tricking people.
Yeah. What do you think the settlement means for other companies?
Well, online retailers watch Amazon very closely. When Amazon does something, the whole industry kind of moves in that direction because it's so hard to compete with Amazon. It's the reason that all these stores offer 2-day shipping now. So I think the fact that this is a pretty large settlement, and as part of it, the ruling says that the Prime subscription program does fall under ROSCA, that law we mentioned earlier. I think that could have a little bit of a chilling effect. It could cause other companies to maybe think twice before they use design to try to manipulate customers.
Yeah. So in conclusion, do you think we could have predicted this outcome based on what we saw in the early days of the trial?
Well, I would love to say that we are excellent at prediction and know exactly what's going on. The best I'll say is that when I got back from the trial and you and I were catching up at our desks, I described this kind of surprising way that the key witness opening testimony went. And we both said, okay, well, we'll see where it goes. And then the next morning we woke up to the settlement.
All right, thanks for joining us for this quick bonus episode. I'm Joshua McNichols.
I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
And this has been Booming. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Every Friday on Seattle Now, we break down the week's news. This week, new placards will go up alongside food safety ratings at Seattle's restaurants, warning patrons if there's a wage violation.
If you've ever worked in a restaurant and you know the health inspector is coming, suddenly that place is the Navy. and you're a topman, you're scrubbing the poop deck.
Hear that and more on Seattle Now, wherever you get your podcasts.